Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little interesting news. I'm not going to be reviewing a video. I'm not going to be necessarily doing that quite as of yet, although I have a feeling that maybe I will be reviewing a video a little bit later on in the day. But I thought that I would just release this news overall to talk about it very, very quickly and just to give my little breakdown. So apparently, Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez, who I've stated a multitude of times in my opinion, is the current number one pound for pound fighter. And to be quite honest with you, I think that is pretty much undisputed at this point. But Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez, apparently from what I've heard for his fights in 2022, which of course now is this year, and of course we're in the very early part of it. But according to what I'm hearing from reports, at least from certain people, is that Canelo Alvarez, his next fight is going to be around the Cinco de Mayo weekend, which of course I believe is around the first week of May when it comes down to it. So Canelo does like to fight in those days, kind of like how Floyd Mayweather Jr. did. But the big question is going to be, who is he going to face next? And that really is the big question. Now, of course, for those of us that have been paying attention to the reports as of recent, we all thought that maybe it was going to be the WBC Cruiserweight Champion, Mr. Ulunga Makabu, which actually, in my personal opinion, and I've always said this, I actually did not mind that fight. I actually was decently excited for the fight because I thought that it was actually a decent chase for history. Now, once again, I don't think that Ulunga Makabu, I don't think that he's necessarily an A-plus skilled fighter, but I do think that he's very tough. He's very powerful. He actually does have some skills anyway when it comes down to it. And I think it would have been interesting to see Canelo at the first time at cruiserweight or bridgerweight, whichever one it would have been. But when it comes down to it, all in all, apparently from recent reports, it is very possible that Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez could be facing that of a Jermall Charlo next. And I want to be surprised. Like I said, Canelo Alvarez, he does seem to be somewhat interested in that Jermall Charlo fight. I think that he always somewhat has been, but I just think that there's been bigger things on his plate within the past few years, and he just hasn't taken that fight. But when it comes down to it, all in all, at the end of the day, I do think Canelo actually has some sort of interest, all in all, to beat a Jermall Charlo and beat a David Benavidez. I think that he has a great amount of interest actually in both of those fights. He talked about both of those fights. It is possible that we may see Canelo Alvarez not only face Jermall Charlo within this year, but also face out of a David Benavidez. And maybe after he does that, maybe then he'll go up to the 175-pound division, take care of business there. Or then maybe he'll go up to cruiserweight, take care of business there, then go back down to 175. I don't really know exactly where Canelo Alvarez is going to go from right now. But if you're asking me personally, which fights all in all that I would rather see Canelo Alvarez in. These are the three opponents, in my opinion, that are more than likely going to get that Canelo Alvarez fight next. It is either A, Olunga Makabu, who is at the Cruiserweight division, of course, the WBC champion. B, I think you have Joe Smith Jr., who is the WBO champion, I believe, at 175. And of course, because Canelo was able to win the former WBO championship at light heavyweight by beating Sergey Kovalev, the way that the WBO works, you can move up and basically, get your mandatory status when it comes down to it. So that fight would be immediately set up, or is going to be that of a Jermall Charlo. If you're asking me personally, out of these three fights, the ones that I believe are more than likely for Saul Canelo Alvarez, at least from what I've heard, what fight would I be most interested in? The first fight that I would actually be most interested in would probably be that of an Ilunga Makabu. But it would be very interesting because a certain amount of people believe that if Canelo moves up and tries to put on that weight, but, I'm actually going to talk about that here in a minute. But, some people believe that he would make the same mistake as a Roy Jones Jr., that he would go all the way up to heavyweight and, basically, never be the same again at 168 or 175 and not be able to take out those guys once he went up to cruiserweight. And I understand a certain amount of people's points, but I don't think that Canelo would really have to gain a whole lot of weight at cruiserweight. I don't think that that's what he would do. I think that if you're a fighter that is going up in weight, sometimes you don't always want to gain extra muscle mass or gain extra weight. I think that Canelo would just stay at his regular weight, which is about 185 to 190 anyway. So Canelo is a person that, in my opinion, he probably would fit, overall, at least in terms of cruiserweight. I don't want to say that he would fit right in because he is naturally smaller than those guys and he probably is going to be outweighed decently by those guys. But what I am saying is this. I think that he'll fit well there in terms of just his own natural weight. I don't think that he's going to try to gain 20 pounds of muscle or anything like that. I don't think that he's going to try to do maybe what some other past fighters have done. I don't think that he's going to do that. I think that all in all, he is going to basically try to rehydrate at his max weight, which is 185 to 190 pounds. And I think that even if he were able to go up to cruiserweight, he probably would still be okay as long as the fights were at 175 to 168. I think that he would be decently okay because I don't think that he would be draining himself. Like I said, Canelo, even at 160 when it comes out, he's been naturally weighing at about 185 for a very, very long time. So I think that Canelo, more than likely, his weight wouldn't be a huge problem. But I would have to take a look at it because he's very disciplined, at least from what I've seen, even though, of course, there was that video the other day of him in the club, but it is what it is. But anyways, when it comes down to it, the second fight that I would like to see the most out of those three contenders, it would be Jermall Charlo. Joe Smith Jr., I think, is a very decent threat towards anyone, but I don't think that he's as skilled overall as a Jermall Charlo. Jermall Charlo, in my opinion, when you talk about him versus Canelo or, Makabu or Joe Smith Jr., I do think that Jermall Charlo is the most talented and is the most skilled out of any of those contenders. But the only thing is that I just don't think Jermall Charlo really has enough to defeat that of a Canelo Alvarez. But I do think it would do very good on the numbers. I think that it would do very good on pay-per-view. I think that it probably may even do a little bit over of 1 million pay-per-view buys. If Canelo could do 900,000 pay-per-view buys with Caleb Plant, I think with Jermall Charlo, it probably could even surpass that. It probably could just do about the same as what the Gennady Golovkin versus Canelo Alvarez matches did, which is about, excuse me, which is anywhere from 900,000 to maybe like 1.2 million pay-per-view buys. So somewhere around there, somewhere within that range. Jermall Charlo has a very decent following. He has a very decently big fan base. David Benavidez is another fighter that has a decent fan base as well, Mexican-American fighter. Both of those fights would be very, very big fights for Saul Canelo Alvarez. So if he were to face both of those fighters within 2022, you really can't complain. Both of those fights are very, very decent fights. If you were to face Ilunga Makabu, I wouldn't really complain. Now, if you were to face Joe Smith Jr., the only way, in my opinion, that would be somewhat acceptable. Of course, Joe Smith Jr., he is a champion, but if you're going to beat Joe Smith Jr. or go after him, in my opinion, I do think that you have to try to unify the whole entire 175-pound division. So that is the only thing with Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez. But it's going to be very interesting because Canelo has the opportunity to really take any fight that he wants. And, now from what I've heard from recent reports, and it is from Mike Coppinger, Mike Coppinger does seem to, know certain things on the inside. Of course, the last big fight that, he reported, like I said, was the Anthony Joshua Tyson Fury fight, which of course did not come to fruition. But I think that he tried his best when it came down to it. I think all in all that they were legitimately trying to get that fight signed. They were trying to sign, but they didn't expect the Deontay Wilder arbitration to get through, which it did. So it is what it is. But when it comes down to it all in all, it's going to be very interesting to see if this is actually true, if Canelo actually is going to face Jermall Charlo next, or Ilunga Makabu, or Joe Smith Jr., whatever opponent that he's going to face next. But in my opinion, Ilunga Makabu, Jermall Charlo, and Joe Smith Jr., those are the three more likely opponents for a Saul Canelo Alvarez as of next time. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Like I said, if you're personally asking me what fight I would actually be most interested in, it actually would be the Ilunga Makabu fight. I believe all in all that would be the most interesting matchup. But if you were to face Jermall Charlo, great fight as well, a great fight. Nothing to complain about there. So it'll be very interesting to see what Canelo Alvarez does here. But that's pretty much all I got to say on the situation as of right now. This is basically just me reporting news. And later on, I may do some videos, certain breakdowns if I need to. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.